Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Michael Feldman. I'm the creator of the Theater and Policy Salon and the producer and dramaturg of Across the River. I'm delighted to welcome you and our online audience of almost 200 viewers to this Theater and Policy Salon on the struggle to realize Enlightenment ideals from the early Republic to today. I especially want to thank our partner, the Vladimir Center at New York University, and thanks also to NYU-DC for hosting us in this newly renovated auditorium. I appreciate the support and collaboration by the NYU-DC staff, especially Yi Chu and Polly Terzian. I'm honored today that we are joined by distinguished panelists from the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as historian of the early U.S. and award-winning author, Fergus Berdowich. And I want to especially thank the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities for their support of this project. One quick perspective. I see this salon conversation as important because we in this society, again, are at a moment when we are reaching for an opportunity to realize fully our ideas of equality and justice. And it's a moment when we each get to choose between optimism and resignation, between selflessness and selfishness. And I have confidence that our natural instinct is toward, as Lincoln would say, the better angels of our nature. Our conversation tonight will be jump-started by an affecting work of art, which is an integral part of our theater and policy salon practice. I'm thrilled that we're able to share with you the first ever staged reading of a new play, Across the River, about Aaron Burr and the early Republic, by Capitol Hill columnist Jamie Stiehm, who's with us today. Without further ado, let's go from New York University in DC to Old New York on a summer day in 1804.
James, cousin once removed on the Edwards side. Come in, what can I do for you?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cousin Burr, you know I enter Princeton in the fall. May I ask to be your secretary next summer?
That's where the trouble between Hamilton and me began. He was never a Princeton man, and I was born to be. I'm afraid I can't promise that, James. Summer is a long way across the water.
Of course, Cousin Burr. I just thought...
When I was a student there, the ghosts of my mother and father were, too. And my mother, Esther, and Edwards, the mind burned brightly. I wish I remembered her, and my father.
I should think that grandfather Jonathan Edwards burned into the souls of sinners.
For good or ill, I was just an innocent babe. I confess his religion got lost somewhere in my soul. A moral compass is hard to keep clean in modern-day politics. We're making America up as we go along.
The last great American Puritan.
Actually, he baptized me. And grandfather, I've sinned in the hands of an angry God, just this morning.
Were you wrong?
I made it right. And I'm afraid that I must this moment go to Washington for an audience with President Jefferson. You see, the master of Monticello sees Hamilton and me as city boys, with New York flash, dash, and making cold, hard cash. Now, we were all about industry, commerce, not slaves cotton picking all day. Cities, shipping, trade, museums, promenades, soirees, concerts. That's the world of progress we agree on. Enlightenment in society, not up on your own precious mountain. I'll give us no Virginia hams or wheels, bells or barbecues. Give us coffee, newspaper, bookshops, a charming city kind of thing. A row house, immigrants, not slave plantations in our bright young republic. That's what we fought for in the war, Hamilton and I, to make the future sing. The city on the hill hum a new tune. Visions of waterworks. So why did it come to this? Were we Newtonian objects destined to collide? On the 4th of July, Hamilton sang a solo for the Revolutionary Patriots. Just 1 week ago. Only we knew. Only one of us would be back next year. Good day, cousin. My best to the family. My friend, Alexander Hamilton. I was shocked. What was it all about? The duel that shaped American history. Biblical. America's Cain and Abel. Hamilton hated how I loved my daughter. His son died by duel. The truth they never tell? He'd rather die than see me president. Oh, damn Hamilton. So much in common that tore us apart. And together we could have saved America from the scourge of slavery. Or we could have built America on brains and banking, not the blood of bondage. You, Alexander Hamilton, rowing across the river, we knew how it would go. I was the best shot in the Revolution. You were Washington's pet king. And here we are. Same age, height, the youngest army officers and patriots, leading lawyers in New York, neighbors, orphans. We even enjoyed each other's company every now and then. The American future belonged to us. So why be my nemesis? But tell it to me, not history. We were a tale of 2 sons, the shining stars of the North. Something tells me Hamilton's story is all ready for posterity. But I could not stand his slander for 1 more summer day. When Hamilton fell, well, better thee than me. Dear President Jefferson, news will have reached you that this morning, July 11, Alexander Hamilton was shot and slain in an interview. His slander, of a personal nature, became intolerable, giving me no choice but to challenge him. I am pleased to remain Vice President, your obedient servant, Aaron Burr, Richmond Hill, New York. Theodosia, precious darling, it was all for you. Hitch the horses to Washington to save my life.
Extraordinary, Mr. Burr. The duel hit like lightning over the land.
Yes, Mr. President, but no worries. I intend to keep my end of our bargain.
And how is your daughter?
Theodosia left me for the governor of South Carolina. Yours?
Polly and Pat's here in the county. We visit often. You and I share one thing. We are widowers.
Yes, we lost our dear ladies, but sometimes you find a close second.
Ladies love you.
Oh, if only they could vote out of 1.
Women vote? Not in my lifetime.
Let me recommend a vindication of the rights of women. The author says women are legally enslaved in need of emancipation.
What an extraordinary concept, Mr. Burr.
A work of genius. Mary Wollstonecraft lived in Paris, another shining light of the Enlightenment. Oh, I stayed up all night reading it.
Oh, my days in Paris. This wine brings it back. We have much to discuss.
I'm a wanted man. I need a good word from you, Mr. President, to calm the public down. Quickly.
There's no news Hamilton made an art of the vendetta, speaking from experience. But how did you get dragged into a duel?
That must remain private.
The talk of the town, did Hamilton aim his first shot? There are rumors to the contrary.
Yes, Hamilton aimed at me first, missed by a country mile. He wasn't one to throw away his shot. Neither of us were.
Poor Creole. Well, I dashed on horseback from Virginia to have this conversation, Burr.
Far be it from me to deny you the charms of Monticello.
Table talk with you, Mr. Burr, is almost perfect, but the United States cannot have a vice president wanted for murder.
The code of honor among gentlemen is not murder.
I cannot defend you now, and I cannot support you for my vice president in the November election. Our partnership is over.
The pact we made in that tide election was that I'll succeed you as president in 1808. So I kindly let you win in 1800. Elder statesman that you are.
The North and South were meant to share power. I know. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and then a brash young New Yorker, namely you, not Hamilton.
Hamilton conspired to make you president before me.
Hamilton hated me a little less than he hated you. I was happy to help him. help me.
We had a gentleman's agreement, Mr. Jefferson.
Your eyes, Mr. Burr, are the first thing people say about you.
Look me in the eye then. Tell me why you're breaking your word of honor.
Don't shoot me.
Tell me.
I hate to break my word as a gentleman, but you had big plans to change the way we do business in my country.
So speaks the Cavalier. But Virginia is no longer a sovereign country. Hamilton and I agreed on that.
I am aware of your illustrious Puritan lineage, Mr. Burr. Now, I'd rather have mine than yours.
The North is far ahead of the South already. You can feel it in the snap of rhythm in the air. But we don't have slaves to do the work while we play all day, pursuing happiness.
I tremble to think that God is just. That your side prevailed in the English Civil War. It might not be the same if North and South come to blows and blood on our own soil.
Slavery is the dark part of the divide getting greater every day. You could not live without slaves, I dare say.
Servants, Mr. Burr, not slaves. Wine, whiskey, may I pour you more of my 1776 vintage?
You know what they say about you, Tom? Under the genteel philosopher lies a ruthless cunning. But John Adams knows. Hamilton knew. No, I do.
I bear no hard feelings, but our good friend Jemmy Madison is now taking your place in line to the presidency.
Jemmy, my friend.
Granted, he lacks your way with people, and he stands 5 feet 4 inches, but Mrs. Madison is already planning soiree.
I made that match for Jemmy and Dolly. He couldn't get it dated, for instance. And it makes perfect sense. But you can govern from home. Jemmy loves you. He thinks everything you say is true.
And his home, Montpelier, is an easy ride on a fine day. Indeed, it works out well.
Hamilton fallen on the field and a high price to pay. Mr. President, 1,000 thanks for your southern hospitality. Good evening.
The pleasure is mine, Mr. Burr. I wish you luck in your future endeavors.
I shall stay on, of course, until my last day in office. Then a Virginia dynasty after me. Good evening.
Of course. Good evening. I won that duel without firing a shot.
The Senate votes to acquit you of all charges. Justice Chase, you shall stay on the Supreme Court. Your political life has been spared. I wish I could say the same about myself, but the mob has spoken. Senators, on my last day, let me leave with this. If I have offended any senator's courtesy on this trial, no injury was intended. I esteem each of you and extend my kindest wishes to all, always. My friends, this place is a sanctuary, a citadel of law, order, and of liberty. And it is here, in this exalted refuge, here, if anywhere, will resistance be made should the Constitution be destined ever to perish by the hands of the demagogue. Its expiring agonies will be witnessed on this floor. On this floor. Farewell thee well, my friends. On this floor.
Jefferson never gave a speech like that. Burr is lost in this tragically, and I say that as a Federalist. They say Burr was too ambitious. Then again, so was Hamilton. The two northern lights. Now there are none. Let it not be. A curse on this capital, this nation.
Theodosia, I am indebted to you for a great portion of the happiness I have enjoyed in this life. You've satisfied all that my heart and affections have hoped and wished.
You wrote that the night before the duel. I was deeply touched by that letter, Father.
You were the only woman that I wrote that to.
It was awful not to be in New York with you, and stuck down south when you were pilloried in public. I missed you every moment.
Come to New York. Bridge the divide between North and South. Your mother Theodosia hosted British and American armies, even George Washington. Well, her unfortunate husband died fighting in a far-off land.
A strapping British army officer, but you, young soldier, stole her heart. She told me she loved you from the moment she met you.
The finest lady I have ever known.
One day, you'll give me the letters you and mother wrote in front of it.
We named you Theodosia. I insisted, fearful of losing her. My mother died young.
So did mine. She prepared me, saying I'd be everything to you.
And indeed you are. It seems she speaks to me through you. Is little Aaron learning his letters?
Of course, father. You know he worships you. Winning a duel is worth a fortune in a boy's eyes.
You and the boy lighted my way. And I have few friends left.
Hamilton has a ton. Myths are being made, but you, father, I heard you gave a brilliant farewell address.
The speeches run in our Edwards family.
Warning of
A demagogue who would ruin the dreams of our republic. Rome reborn.
As Plutarch told it, Roman Senate was the last bastion of the Republic, just where Caesar was stabbed with 23 wounds.
Oh, New York was not the same without you, darling. Parties we gave. You were a perfect hostess. The smartest girl in America. Like my lost mother. And wife.
The city girl who knows her Homer and Herodotus. They're like old friends, as there's absolutely nothing to do here at the Oaks. Little Aaron and my husband are my only joys, so this is my lot in life. Lying low in low country.
I hope they'll save a place at Princeton for little Aaron, despite my fault.
I didn't need to go to Princeton to keep up with the gentlemen scholars.
Gentlemen scholars indeed. Right as youth, more like. You were better off with those private tutors teaching classics, math, and poetry. I hope to convince the world that women have a mind and soul.
I fear your and Mary Wollstonecraft's ideas were ahead of their time.
We have hope that our American experiment can still emancipate women. So I wanted you to have this portrait of Mary Wollstonecraft I commissioned.
How bittersweet it is to see it. The great Mary had a daughter named Mary, but giving birth killed her. Actually, my health has suffered since Aaron came along.
This climate is hard on your constitution. All the more reason to come north for a visit. Your room at home awaits.
Still your best girl. I miss our lives in New York.
Those days are gone. 1,000 tongues in New York are talking about the duel.
Alexander is America's tragic hero, the New Yorker who made his own myth.
The duel worked out well for Hamilton. Now I'm missing my equal and opposite.
When he came to parties we gave, he marked you the only man who ever entered.
Or perhaps for loving my Theodosias. Betsy was hardly his heart's desire.
When you took her father's Senate seat, the war began.
Princeton was just an opening skirmish.
He saw me grow up, pinched my cheeks.
Indeed, you were at the heart of our drama.
What have I to do with Alexander Hamilton? Hello?
At a dinner upstate, Hamilton said something so damned. It was a death wish. If he knew me at all.
To do with me?
I should not repeat the slander, but we have no secrets. He accused me of incest. Incest! After a barrel of insults behind my back, that was the end of it. He would not rest until he ruined my reputation.
How vile, Alexander. Born of your lust to turn Burr to dust.
That is wish anyways. It's late. We must go to bed.
Here's a candle, Father, for your room.
Good night, sweetness. Theodosia, the world does not understand us. Free at last.
The Republic is a rather fragile thing. I came here to see you at a fair trial.
Chief Justice Marshal, you saved my neck.
You're not guilty of treason, Mr. Burr, but you do seem to attract danger, trouble, and women.
I am blessed that way.
At your Western expedition. Tell me about it.
That I was to lead a war against Spain to claim Mexico is a figment of General Wilkinson's fiction. He is the one guilty of high crimes. I was just out for a lark, with no army.
You could not have had a better witness against you than Jamie Wilkinson. But true, didn't you wish to get even with my cousin?
Your cousin has won our argument about the road this country has taken. But I know Mr. Jefferson's wrath blows hard.
I can tell you, sir, he was here every day in spirit, watching closely, writing me letters, send you to the gallows. You are certainly still on his mind.
A president of the United States should not have so much free time to influence the judiciary.
Tom has no idea of that vexing separation. He was furious when you took your own defense.
Has he not heard of Marbury versus Madison?
Oh, we are bound in blood, my cousin and I. But between us, I can't stand the man. Adams pointed me on his way out, and Tom hated that. He speaks of me as the last Federalist fossil. I must say, the man is a very good hater.
There is a midnight side that others seldom see under the Virginian surface. Still, he is the most charming man I've ever met.
Mr. Burr, you had the nerve to tie him for president in 1800. Unforgivable. And you dared to be a younger rival, and you and I are the same age. You threatened his place in the pamphlet. Writer of the Declaration, destined to be president, was written in the stars. And you were in the way.
So exile was not enough for me.
You're as Carthage is Rome, if you have some tears.
If not for you,
First treason trial of the Republic. I heard Tom spread word of your friendship with Benedict Arnold and his bewitching liar wife, Peggy.
oh, I commanded soldiers in General Arnold's regiment. Peggy tried to seduce me in wartime, that is all. I never saw Jefferson on horseback in the army.
First, Jefferson plotted against Adams. Then Hamilton. Then you. Then me. But I have a lifetime appointment.
And you shall live a long life, Mr. Chief Justice.
I intend to grow old on watch. And we were soldiers at the cruel Valley Fort winter.
I remember it well.
And the truth is, I came to Richmond because I wished the same for you. A chance to grow old. My cousin's reach in Virginia is so great, I fear for your life. John Marshall can't save the Constitution. Who can?
Your kindness is beyond measure.
Try to stay on the quiet side of domestic tranquility. Easy and steady as she goes. Quiet life.
The Virginia way is not for me. How many slaves live on your land?
The slave trade is wicked. But I own about 100 Negroes in town.
Two. Don't you see slavery as a sin and a shadow hanging over us? It's no way to run a republic. What peace can there be when North and South are so at odds?
How many American revolutions can we make in one lifetime? Is one not enough? It is a way of life that can't be broken.
A free-breathing London might be best for me. I pray Hamilton's ghost won't go with me, and that Jefferson may leave me in peace.
I wish you well, Mr. Burr. I voted for you. In Virginia, no less.
Then let me give you a parting word. Look out for old Hickory. My friend from Tennessee, Andrew Jackson, is your next problem president. He told me that he will style himself a man of the people and become the first president of the common man, yet not a man of all the people. Jackson boasted that he owns about 100 slaves who tilled Tennessee soil. This so-called general swears by the love of God to be a kind master. But he told me that he'll never forget a friend, but forgive an enemy. Good day, Mr. Chief Justice.
Fare thee well. And Tom, get off my neck.
Aaron Burr.
Bentham, I crossed the Atlantic to meet you.
Good Lord, you're in time for tea with my sacred teapot.
With pleasure.
I know you by your eyes.
I'm a man without a country.
Yes, you come highly recommended. London and history are at your side.
London, yes. History? No.
We are men of reason and rigor, pain and pleasure measured. Simple. When you shot Hamilton that fateful morning, you calculated the pleasure of his death would be greater than the pain his loss brought.
Little did I know.
Utilitarianism in action.
I fancy myself more of a visionary than just a sometimes duelist.
We'll get to that, but indulge my curiosity. What pleasure did you measure?
The cessation of the trash he talked all the time. Yet he was my fellow orphan, soldier, lawyer, and patriot. My brother in spirit in many ways.
So he'd rather die than say sorry to you.
He had several chances, Bentham, to live past 50, to save us grief, to steer the ship of state in the right direction. Now I have nothing but time.
Did he fancy you?
No.
Perhaps all Hamilton wanted was to cause the greatest unhappiness for you? No longer a bright young thing at the mercy of the Virginians, but best years behind him.
Now you mean me or him?
Suppose how hard it was to find his way without Washington. And he had to suffer seeing you vice president at the very same time. His nearest, dearest enemy.
Depend upon it. My success was his failure. He seemed broken after his son Philip died in a duel.
But a brilliant man like you seeking a duel. Come now, this is the 19th century.
No choice.
Duels and slavery. America! England's troubled child.
We are restless and growing, like a flawed but promising child.
If I may suggest a theory, Hamilton was miserable but bent on making you more so.
If you can slay me one way,
He left behind a beautiful story about not taking the first shot. The myth will be burnished. You, the villain, you, the hero.
the world has chilled. Many I thought attached to me have forsaken my friendship. My career is over. I was even tried for treason.
Much the better. Hamilton sowed a garden of poison toward you, saving roses for his reputation.
So he would be happier dead if he could haunt me from the grave.
That is my view. The obverse of my human happiness theory. I must write it down.
Bentham, he did fire the first shot, bungled it up into a tree.
And then,
I think we knew how it would end. I see it spelled in fate now. Alexander and I. Parallel lines of ambition that were fated to collide. Tragically.
shall we take a ramble? Then you must stay for dinner, Burr. I invited God.
Godwin, the husband of the late Mary Wollstonecraft? Well, her writings inspired me to believe in the rights of women.
No wonder they got rid of you.
My mother, wife, and daughter were equal to the creme de la creme of the Republic.
Care for a walking stick?
No, thank you. The summer sun and your bracing company is making me feel alive again.
My sacred teapot works wonders.
Summer pudding with your country house berries, Bentham. Simple yet exquisite.
How many units of human happiness, chaps?
Plenty, and especially for little Mary. Father? My Mary Godwin was curious to meet our friends from America. Thank you, Bentham, for this kind invitation.
Gather ye berries.
Father, my name is Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin.
Made in your mother's image.
How do you know, sir?
I had a picture of her in my Philadelphia lodgings. When I was a senator, I hope to meet her one day. My wife Theodosia and I had a salon that introduced Mary Wollstonecraft's writing to our country.
You spoke of her philosophy in America.
I did. I stayed up all the night reading The Vindication. A work of genius. I told anybody who would listen. You did.
Your wife was the radical revolutionary flower of the Enlightenment in Paris and London, Godwin. Your mother, little Mary.
I go to visit her grave often.
What do you do there?
We speak. Her spirit tells me the world was too small for her in 1797.
She left you with many blessings. Named after her, you two locked forever like my Theodosias.
I do not even remember her. My birth was her death. How can she forgive me?
Daughter, darling, you carry Mary with you wherever you go.
Sublime reason and passion. Pleasure is the business of woman's life, according to present society, and while it continues to be so, little can be expected of them. It gives me a bittersweet satisfaction to meet her loved ones.
It does a body good to hear that, because in polite society there is little talk of her loss.
How can England forget her?
The English excel at stepping stones over deep waters.
Do you know why we didn't have a bloody revolution like the French? We English don't like bloody scenes in public.
I should like to say this to young Mary.
Yes, Mr. Mr. Burr.
My mother died when I was very young. Her name is Esther. My father died then as well. My namesake, Aaron.
Do you remember what they look like?
No, I was raised by relatives. My mother, Esther, goes with me.
Have you had a happy life?
By my skin, please, for utility.
Forgive Mary, she is intrigued by you.
I should say yes, before a day in 1804 hit me like lightning. 11th of July, crossing the Hudson. I wish I knew the water was wide enough for us both. Hamilton's death has given me more pain than pleasure.
How pity.
Why don't you just say hang it all and spend the summer out in the country house? We'd have loads of fun.
Americans find refuge here. I happened to pass by Benedict Arnold's house the other day.
All Americans are not alike. I knew General Arnold in battle. His wife Peggy was a lovely sprite. But I beg you not to confuse us.
May I say why?
Yes.
Because you didn't betray your country betrayed you.
The truth is,
We must go home. Come now, Mary.
you have a felicitous way with words. I predict you shall be a writer of force and imagination, like your mother Mary.
I shall send you the first edition of my book, Mr. Burr.
She slayed me, slew me.
Perhaps we could prevail on you to stay. You're such good company.
I could wander the world, sparkling society from Scotland and Sweden, and wish not to miss my country. But I do, damn it, in my blood. So I shall go home again.
Burr, do be rational. We haven't discussed the panopticon model prison yet, or women's suffrage. Do I dare speak of homosexuality? You are better able to grasp my ideas than any man I have ever met.
The honor is mine.
Your worthy goal of women's rights will take a century at least.
Men will not give the vote to women. Women must take it and make scenes in the streets, even in England.
Quite right. You are indeed invigorating, but I feel that your mind is made up, Burr.
I'm afraid I must away, much as I'd love to stay.
You tell President Jefferson for me that he is full of nonsense on stilts and unforgivably unkind.
I'll tell him you said so. Then you'll get a letter that beguiles you from Monticello.
Hate to see you go. They say the perfect visit is too short.
Any visit with you would be too short. Good night, my friend.
Good night. Those eyes.
Dearest father, there is no more joy for me. The world is blank. I have lost my precious boy. My child is gone.
Little Aaron Burr Alston, 11 years old. It is the darkest fate to bury a child.
I can't see the light of day. I am up until all hours of the night. Please let me go.
Go where?
Home to see you.
That would be my heart's desire.
Joseph has an election, so I'll travel solo.
So much the better.
A New York cure. I've been languishing so long without you.
Make the arrangements, Theodosia, by land or sea. God's sake, Theodosia, where are you?
Lost, father.
No. Your ship shall come in. I'll meet you at the harbor. You're just days away, darling. I'm counting them by heart.
I hope to see you one last time.
New York and I will cure what ails you. The city awaits.
Nobody knows how to comfort me like you, father, or the sorrow of losing mother.
Theodosia, you were my only comfort. You are my only comfort.
Now you shall have to live without me.
Don't tell me that. Don't speak like that.
We sailed into a stormy sea with a war going on, hearing word of pirates preying on schooners.
Treacherous tempest blowing off North Carolina. I read it and I thought the captain would steer clear.
We sailed that way to avoid pirates and British warships.
Seems to be I.
Ravaged by the wind and waves, we could not hear each other speak as we tried to save the ship from sinking.
What we can.
Doomed, father. I drowned in the gales, lost at sea.
The deepest, darkest fate.
The world will never know nor understand how we loved each other. Oh, I tried to take mother's place.
The world. How little it means or matters without you, my darling.
Father, I must away.
One last look. Let me gaze at you, lovely Theodosia. My heart sinks like that ship in an ocean of tears. The cruelest cut of all. I lost my parents when I was too young to remember. I lost my beloved wife, Theodosia. I lost the jewel that morning across the river. I lost my dream of making America free and full of life like New York and Philadelphia, not a sea of slave plantations. Madison is president now. Monroe's next. And then Virginia's victory over American history will be complete. 1 million enslaved down south and counting. A 24-year dynasty is a long time in the life of a young nation. Alexander, hear me now. We were the only ones who might have saved the nation from sundering over slavery. That was ours to do, left undone. America's original bloody sin is growing greater. Sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Hurrah for the choice of the nation, our chieftain so brave and so true. We'll go for the great Reformation, for Lincoln and liberty too.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Angela Tate. I'm the curator of women's history at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm the moderator of today's panel. To my left is my I'm reading off because we're in order on the website. Jasmine Singh, Council Democracy for the Brennan Center for Justice. Then this is Dr. Maya Kornberg, Research Fellow, Elections and Government Program, Democracy, Brennan Center for Justice, and then finally our esteemed author and historian, Bergen Portovich. We're going to talk a little bit about the play and also about history, and some of my questions are moving us through the play as well as through time, because a lot of the script, as you saw, was not just stuck in the early 18th or 19th century, but moved us into the present day. And so my first question is about the early Republic period. It's relatively unknown to many. People do know about the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers, but in this period in between that and the Civil War, it tends to be underexplored, underdiscussed, underwritten about. What moments in the play do you feel best defines how dynamic this period was in U.S. history?
You're looking at me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, first, Jamie is up there somewhere. Jamie, thank you very much for an extremely interesting play and for attempting to unpeel, indeed, a piece of history that Americans tend to know very little about. May have heard about the duel, and that's about it. And I think what the play captures clearly is a kind of a nut of conflict in the early republic, which is extensive because went far beyond the personalities of Burr and Hamilton. It was extraordinary that the constitutional government even got off the ground before the first Congress met in 1789. James Madison had sat in New York, then the capital, by the way, essentially biting his fingernails, worrying that nobody was going to show up. And there was a tremendous challenge in that this early period to stitch a government together and to find some kind of commonality, a kind of shared responsibility. Nobody knew whether it would survive. Nobody. We look back at this period as if everything were, well, the Constitution signed, bang, we're done, which was far from the case. The Constitution was a piece of paper. It was only a piece of paper. It was a plan. And people had to turn this into a machine. Patrick Henry, famously, who didn't like the Constitution, by the way, but nonetheless, very grudgingly decided to support that form of government and said, well, he referred to it as a crazy machine, because it didn't make a lot of sense to him, but it was what they had. So this is the context in which this is taking place. And something that Jamie touches on a little briefly, I would say, is Burr's Western expedition, which is very complex. Not the time to go into it in detail, but what was this country going to be? What was the West going to be? Was there even going to be a United States west of the Appalachians? I mean, Burr is sort of entangled in this as well. So it's more latent than obvious in the play, but it's there in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I want to pick up on two important themes that I think Fergus brought up. The first is this notion of stitching together our government. So I'm a scholar of Congress and of the committee system. It's not something that most people think about when they think about this period, but actually this very same period of the late 18th and early 19th century is exactly when our congressional institutions were forming. By 1830, you had a committee system which still today helps Congress govern and apportion responsibility. That's just one example of the many different governing institutions that were organically forming at that time. And I think that that scene with Burr's farewell speech is very telling of kind of the gravity of the institution of Congress then and the importance of some of those key formative years. And the other thing that I wanted to echo in what Fergus was saying is just I think the very skillful way in which the play talks about these regional divides and the importance of regional divides. And if I might actually go even further back than the play. These regional divides have really been something that the United States has dealt with from the 1600s until today, I would say. Actually, a fact that many people don't know when they think about the Salem witch trials in the 1690s even, is that most of the accusers of witches lived in one side of the city, the more rural side, and most of the accused, the women who were accused of being witches, were living in the more cosmopolitan or urban side of Salem. So this rural-urban divide that Burr also references when he says that the man of Monticello called them city boys. That's one thing that permeates our history, this regional north-south divide, which I think is a major theme of the play and has continued to decide our political cleavages, our party politics, and so much else in this country have really existed throughout the Republic, even before the era that the play handles, and really through today. So I think those are two major themes that I just wanted to echo.
Well, I definitely want to pick up on that theme because Aaron Burr does lament that his rivalry with Alexander Hamilton and the subsequent fatal duel is the reason why the New York faction, anti-slavery, women's rights, etc., did not influence the development of the United States. What are some of your thoughts on that particular strain of thought? I mean,
Well, okay. Just for context here, I think it's worth pointing out that New York, yes, it was a city, but it had a population of 30,000 people. And it was the second city after Philadelphia. So urban, yes. And true enough, that some of the same attitudes that in our own era tend to be attributed to big city corruption and immorality and all these things that some people associate with city life tended to be imputed to the city, even when it had a population of only 30,000. So it was a very, very rural country at the time. But okay, let's take on slavery. Burr owned slaves. Burr owned a bunch of slaves. Burr bought and sold human beings. Burr's daughter, Theodosia, extraordinary young woman that she was, went and married the governor of South Carolina, the epicenter in that era of the importing of slaves, which was still taking place. when the play occurs. And Burr didn't say, Hiroshi, you can't go down there. Okay. You know. So this is a world of slavery. And New York, actually, there was no neat dividing line in this period between North and South with respect to slave ownership. Virtually all the northern states still had enslaved people. You could sort of nitpick that, but basically all of them did. And New York's numbers of enslaved was increasing thanks to the prosperity of the post-war era, post-revolutionary era. People were buying slaves and not freeing them so much. Again, in that context, Burr's and Hamilton's support for, they were founding members of the New York Emancipation Society. It really mattered within context, but these were still men who were living in a context of slavery, and Burr was not an abolitionist. I mean, it's not really fair to talk about abolitionism for another 30 years, give or take, but he was a forerunner, and he deserves credit for that. I mean, it was awfully hard for white people, as opposed to enslaved black people, to think their way out of slavery, to really morally come to grips with it. He was in the process of that, so that matters. It really mattered. That's true of Hamilton too, by the way. They foreshadowed what the next generation was going to begin to embrace, but I think there was divide over slavery in 1800 thereabouts is pretty slim. It's pretty slim. Americans mostly have American political leaders have kind of made their peace with it. 1787 Constitutional Convention, a deal was made some Northerners unhappy, others didn't care very much, truth be told. So we're not yet at the point where the crisis over slavery is within sight. So people do instinctively, even Jefferson, fear and know that it may come one day.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on another kind of theme of that faction and of the play in general, which is women's rights, where again I see it as kind of a through line rather than something in which this was necessarily a defining moment. I'll go back to Salem again just because it's top of mind for me. The women who were accused of being witches in Salem were more likely to be widowers, women going through menopause, women who defied societal expectations in some way. Women in that early period, like Anne Hutchinson, who spoke out against local ministers, and even in that early Puritan period, were met with backlash. And so the ideas that are brought up in play in terms of the difficulty that American society has had recognizing women's autonomy, bodily autonomy, physical autonomy, spiritual autonomy is not new. And it's definitely that ended in that period either. I mean, 100 years later, we have the Comstock Act, which now has been in the news again. But that act in the 1870s banned mailing of illicit materials, and contraceptives at that point were characterized as illicit materials and obscene materials. But it was another way of trying to control women's reproductive justice, people's bodies, people's sexuality, and this continues to be an issue today. The Comstock Act is in the news again as we fight over reproductive rights yet again. And so for me, the play was something that I think should be seen in the context of this overarching arc of the struggle that we have had as a nation to fully recognize women. And I might just end by highlighting that the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, is something that is also back in the news now and is on the ballot, at least in New York State where I vote. This is an amendment to enshrine gender equality in our Constitution, and it's something that we've been trying to pass for the last several decades since the women's rights movement. So these arguments are still very much alive, and I think have been since before the nation was founded.
And I think just taking a broad view of what both of you brought up in the last couple of answers, I think about this line in the play that was, we're just making it up as we go in referring to the Republic. And I still feel like when we draw these connections of what the issues that the play is contending with and what was happening in that period, and drawing those lines to what we're dealing with and seeing now, we are still making up that Republic. And it still feels like democracy is this project that we're working on. And so, I am a lawyer. I don't have the sort of historical expertise that some of my colleagues do, but I think about voting legislation, for example, which is an area that I work in. And I see what's happened in the last few years since 2020. I see this barrage of voting legislation being passed around the country. And you have some places, and like this, the regional theme that you brought up, some places are really pushing for access to the vote. And other places you see are restricting access to the vote. So how easy it is for you to vote really depends sometimes on just a matter of where you live. And so that those regional differences and where, the principles that we're sort of moving out towards is still something that we contend with today. And I still feel like we are working on this project that is democracy, and it's still very live. It's a live issue. It's not like we've made it in any way.
I want to sit with that further. What other elements of the play do you feel are this through line, as you said, through the 19th century, the 20th century, and to today?
So I might actually take this moment to highlight some of our recent work on one of the themes of the play, which is political violence. Of course, the play, I think, very skillfully shows that Aaron Burr is not only defined as history has defined him by this duel, and yet we do see, and this was not the only instance of violence between politicians at that time, and indeed political violence has been with us again for as long as we've had this country. But it is very troubling and taking on a new and heightened form today. So last summer at the Brennan Center, we did a national survey of local and state office holders across the country. And we asked people about their experiences of violence, violence against them, against their staff, against their families, and how it's impacting their ability to do their job and represent their constituents. And what we heard was that an alarmingly high number of state and local office holders are telling us that they are experiencing today insults, threats, harassment, and abuse. Women and people of color in office experience more abuse, and they experience different kinds of abuse that targets their gender, their race, more likely to target their families. And as a result of this very worrisome trend, people are deciding not to remain in office. Among local office holders that we spoke to, about half of the women that we surveyed said that they would be less likely to run for re-election or run for higher office as a result of the abuse. Many of the people that we spoke to said that they were shying away from issues like gun control because they were afraid for the safety of their families. And many people are saying that they're afraid to engage with their citizens. And so I did want to take a moment to highlight this because I think that it is unfortunately another through line of our republic, and something that we need to continue to face today because it has, as we show in this research and as others have shown as well, real repercussions for our democracy. If people are unable to stay in office and do their jobs, and particularly if we have a disparate impact on women and people of color, that's going to be hurting descriptive representation in our state, in our local office, and ultimately in Congress as well. And so I just wanted to highlight that as something that I think is really should be top of mind for us here today.
Yeah, I second that. It's absolutely true. The degree of violence in the United States today, especially as it descends down from the higher levels of government to state and even local government and to, as we all know, the level of poll workers and so on, is really extraordinary. We should bear in mind, as you already said, that there's always been violence in American politics. There's always been a degree of chaos in American politics. James Madison tried to, in crafting the Constitution, as he mostly did, not all by himself, tried to take that into account. It was part of why the system was organized the way it was, with power so diffused and without, even at the beginning, excluding anybody except enslaved people, obviously, and so on. But if you look at any particular period in American history, whether it's the atmosphere of 1800 or it's the War of 1812 period, antebellum times, and so on, or the horrendous violence that saturated the South after the Civil War. Massive, I mentioned this because I just finished a book about this, about Ku Klux Klan violence, which was massive, with thousands of people killed, and labor violence and so on. No need to list every. The point is simply that it's always been there, and the country has always somehow had to wrestle with this. But given the extraordinary lethality of weapons today, coupled with, frankly, fascistic thinking for the first time in this country since the 1930s. It's not the very first time, the 30th, it was here, is a very poisonous situation that, frankly, I don't think we know very well how to deal with.
Yeah, and if I might add to that, in addition to the guns that you mentioned, the other thing I think is new is social media. In our study, people talk about social media as a major vector for abuse. And I think that's something that we really need to be thinking about, and we think about it in a lot of different contexts, but also in this context, in the context of political violence that electeds face as well, online.
Sure, although the newspapers of the early 19th century are pretty violent also.
In different ways.
Not as fast,
I want to leave time for Q&A. So I really hope everyone has a perspective on how the 250th will be shaped by the current moment, the past, and the future. And how you feel that this play reflects or conflicts with your own experiences around thinking about this anniversary.
I can go. So I think how I'm thinking about it and how this play is sort of informing my answer is, again, back to this sort of making of democracy. And I feel like for a long time, it did feel like we were moving forward, like the outcomes that we were getting from litigation, from policy advocacy, from protesting in the streets, we were getting to an outcome that felt like a more progressive, more fuller version of what democracy looks like. And, I think the starkest difference that happened is 2020 and the wake of 2020 and the spread of conspiracy theories about that election being was not secure, the results were not secure, and that there was rampant voter fraud despite no evidence of it being so. And I feel like we're dealing with misinformation and disinformation in a way that I have not sort of seen in my lifetime, or conscious adult lifetime. And so I feel like I think about like back to the ideals of the Constitution, of democracy, of what we were fighting for when these documents were thought of and were made. And I'm not idealizing that time. I'm not idealizing
Burr's ideals at all. Slavery was still in existence. Our capital was built on the backs of slaves. But I think there was a sense of, we're moving forward, we're going to do better. And we got to get there somehow. And I think what's happened in the last few years is so many people don't believe in our institutions anymore because of a small few that have spread sort of these conspiracy theories about not believing in our institutions and not having faith in our elections officials. And regarding those people who are trying to make democracy work, make elections work, kind of like the folks who make the wheels go round, taking aim at those people and the sort of meat and potatoes of how this democracy works. And so the way I'm thinking about 2026 is democracy works as well as the people who believe in it. And so I think that it's a matter of believing that we will get back to that forward movement. And I think there's so many organizations and folks who are thinking about this. And I do really feel like it's a silent majority that wants that future, but a loud few that are hampering that from happening.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on what Jasmine was saying about kind of this notion that these conversations are not finished and that we should not take this for granted. As you said, that democracy is still a work in progress. I started at the beginning saying that our key congressional institutions, our key government institutions were forming at that time. But we should not be tricked into thinking that they are not malleable now and that they have not continued to change. Congress changes all the time in the way that it does things, in the way that rules are set, in the way that parties interact. Even just in a span of a few years, norms and rules change tremendously. And so our institutions are constantly evolving. And that is what gives me hope as we reach this anniversary, that there is room for positive change as well. Nothing is ossified, and things can continue to be reshaped. And then, with that, I think it's important to carry forward this notion that we shouldn't take things for granted. I mentioned earlier that the Comstock Act is coming up again. We see a lot of legislation that touches on reproductive justice coming up again 100 years later. And these conversations that we thought that we had, we need to continue to be having, and we need to continue to strive towards these ideals of liberty and equality that we've been imperfectly striving towards since the beginning. And so I think that's something that the play really inspired for me, is this notion that these things are unfinished and yet are also very malleable, and we're able to continue to shape them.
I think we're all pretty nearly of like mind on all these points. And at the risk of merely reiterating what's already been said, it's always a work in progress. Democracy is a work in progress. The United States is a work in progress. They knew at the beginning it was a work in progress. There were no originalists at the origin. It's a made-up idea that reflects a certain current political point of view and current interests, okay? Madison was not an originalist, nor were any of his colleagues. They expected the country to continue to reinvent even its basic framework when necessary, hence amendments, okay? And I think it would be unfortunate and naive if we, in our own era, forgot that you've got to keep working on it and imagine that there was some halcyon time, and it all just worked really well. And because Tip O'Neill, had a beer with Ronald Reagan, the country was, I remember that. A lot of people weren't very happy. I'm old enough to remember the McCarthy era. When the soul of the country was also at stake, and as it was in the Depression, which was in the majority of my parents, okay, when Americans had to struggle over whether this crazy machine was going to survive. So if we're still struggling to keep the crazy machine going, we are in keeping with our history and traditions, and I will say one last thing here, you know, since the premise of your question had to do with the 2026. If you look at the way the original machinery of the government and the Constitution are created, it's pretty amazing. It's extraordinarily amazing. Americans are fond of saying, as is much of the world, that we're a so new country, but yet we have one of the oldest continuously operating governments in the world. They did a pretty good job. And it's hard to change these institutions. Some things obviously like incredible imbalance in the Senate, which is one would say a catastrophe, but there it is. You don't change something like that overnight. But we have to think a much longer view of history and the evolution of political institutions than Americans generally like to take. We all like things to be changed the way we want faster, including people we don't agree with who feel the same way. It's just a different set of issues. And we're all in that boat together. The founders knew it. We should remember it. We have no real choice here. So if we're still at each other's throats in 2026, we are upholding the tradition of America.
Well, there is a microphone being passed around for the Q&A. Raise your hand if you have a question for any of the candidates.
Thank you. I'm curious about the struggle toward enlightenment. I mean, I love the staged reading, et cetera. I feel like I learned a lot that I didn't know about Aaron Burr, but I guess regarding political violence, and sort of your ideas about it, obviously it's not just physical, but also internet kind of stuff. I mean, I would really appreciate it if we could have, I mean, I do have a sense of urgency. And I'm not interested in waiting till 2026 for, for some recommended actions. I mean, if you could each give one thing for us to do as an audience even, I mean, I see a lot of talk about this and not much do. So you all seem to be expert on the topic. So how can we continue to shape this malleable structure into something that's more positive and less divisive? Thank you.
You actually jumped the run of show. That was our final question. So sorry. I'm glad you started with that, because we can start the conversation with that.
And I know something will be sent out after this as well that sort of puts into writing things that I think we're going to share on stage. But I think there's so many different ways to sort of get engaged, depending on your capacity and interest. So like staying informed, staying engaged. So, the Brennan Center has amazing resources on our website to just get a sense of what's going on politically in the world, what are the cases to watch, what's the legislation to watch, just to get a sense of what's going on, what should I care about at this time. And there's a whole host of organizations that do that kind of similar work. On a personal level, what Maya was talking about, poll workers have been so threatened and harassed, but there's still thousands and thousands of people that make elections work. So if you're interested, you can become a poll worker. And as much as it is an issue that people are facing, those kinds of threats and violence, it depends on where you are, number one. I think it really depends on the jurisdictions and whatnot that you're in. But quite frankly, you're here in DC, you can become a poll worker here. And that's a really lovely way to get involved at a local level. I also think staying informed, knowing when to vote, knowing how to vote, knowing when you can go to vote, and making sure the people around you know, going to websites, going to official websites, going to your local elections office website, or going to your local state website, generally speaking. Those are really great resources to make sure that you have the right information, because there is a lot of things going on social media that is not going to give you accurate information. So just being wary and going to official websites and websites that you trust and sources that you trust to get the information you need. I'll leave it there because I know there's a lot of ideas of ways to get involved.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, I think that getting involved in the elections is one great and important way to be contributing. But even between and beyond elections, one way to stay engaged is to engage with members, is to call your congressperson and your local representative, is to attend. I mean, in DC, you can attend actual congressional hearings, but Congress also has field hearings around the country for those who are on Zoom that you can attend. Right now, the Agriculture Committee is doing a listening tour throughout America to listen to people's perspectives about the Farm Bill. And people can sign up and tell Congress what they think. There are so many ways in which you can engage. If people, you know, in many districts, members do town halls. Engaging with your member, engaging in these opportunities that representative democracy has to be listening to citizen voices is such a tremendously important part of the health of our democracy and our ability to be shaping these institutions. And I think it's also an act of hope. One of the things that is really worrisome to me is the tremendous disillusionment, particularly among young people, with institutions like Congress, and there's a lot of good reasons for this, but channeling any frustration that we might have with our institutions into action, into engagement, into staying informed. That's the way that I think that we can be creating change and strengthening our democracy. And I'll just end with something small that the violence we actually have. So as Justine mentioned, there's a lot of resources on the Brennan Center website that we can plug. One of them is a really powerful video of legislators themselves telling stories of the violence that they've experienced. And that's a video that is also on social media. You can share it online. You can send a link. And raising awareness about this problem and encouraging people to speak out against it and saying this is not acceptable, that this is how electeds are treated, is another really, really important thing that you can do just by sharing and spreading the word and raising awareness.
Yeah, I would just briefly add that I agree that, I mean, one of the most disturbing aspects of the current climate is the plummeting confidence in American institutions, in institutions that work, in institutions that work pretty well, work the way they were planned to work. And this is close to unique in American history. Even when the South seceded in 1861, the Confederacy, they wanted to preserve slavery, but they copied the US Constitution. Now, it wasn't a secession because of the institutions, it was secession was to preserve slavery. And I mean, this is something very, very troubling and difficult to come to grips with, I think. I would also certainly urge anybody, any age, to work in the polls. It's a great experience if you haven't done it. That's where the rubber meets the road in democracy. I mean, I did that up in New York State, which was my home for many years, in a district that was pretty much owned by the other political party at the time. But it was a great experience to deal with voters face to face, to be part of the machinery on a very small scale, maybe not so small because that was, but there's nothing that builds confidence in the system as being part of it at that level, in my own personal experience. And finally, I'll just say, vote for candidates who support our institutions. Vote for candidates who actually believe in democracy. Vote for candidates who aren't invested in tearing down American fundamental institutions. And that certainly includes idealistic or cynical third-party candidates who really are in a position to do great damage by feeding that cynicism in the way they campaign and so on. Friends don't let friends vote for idiots. Huh?
There's one thing I wanted to add to that, but there's also you can volunteer for voter protection hotlines. These are there's the Election Protection Network operates basically year round whenever there are elections, because it's not just when the presidential election comes around or the primaries. And they always are looking for volunteers. 186 Our Vote is the number, and that line. And if you ever have an issue at the polls, this is a number that you can call to, or if you're looking for information about how to vote, when to vote. They're a really great resource. You can staff the lines to answer voters' questions when they're having issues, and you can use that resource yourself. So that's another resource. Any other questions?
Thank you for this. So when we're talking in terms of the lack of trust and belief in these institutions, how do you see us rebuilding that from like a perspective of infrastructure and actual justice practices?
And one of the infrastructures that we don't often think of as an infrastructure is civic infrastructure. And so things like what I was talking about, civic engagement practices, getting the community engaged around topics, have actually been shown to repair trust and to instill a sense of political efficacy in people. That is the sense that they can actually shape things, that they have power to be shaping these decisions. So I think that there are very simple ways to be restoring trust, but I also think that it's very important to note that there is good reason for some of the distrust in institutions. They don't always serve the people that they were meant to be serving so effectively, and so I think that it is important to be engaging with these institutions, but also to be doing things like supporting movements. I mentioned the ERA, but there are many other movements to be creating more equitable institutions that deserve our trust, and to be electing more members that are representative of our country, both in their identity and in their lived experience, and their substantive policy preferences. So things like voting are important for that, but things just like being engaged in the conversation and ensuring that our institutions actually are doing their job is just really, really important. And I think that it is worth saying that there is good reason to be frustrated with these institutions, but that does not mean that we should disengage from them. That means that we should be working to make them more representative.
And just a small example of how strong our institutions can be is if we look at what happened in 2020. There were so many attempts to not certify the election. And despite the insurrection in our capital, that election was certified, and it was not only certified, but it was deemed by our DHS that it was a smooth and secure election. And that was with one of the highest turnouts that we've seen in, over a century or something like that. And so we do have resilience. There is resilience there. I think it's just a matter of, I think we can be skeptical, but I think there is machinery at work, and there is resiliency within our institutions.
Yeah, I would say taking also a longer view. It's imperative to restore civics education to the schools. The school systems around the country hemorrhaged that kind of education beginning 40, 50 years ago. And it's a patchwork. Districts vary, so highly localized. But too many people, it's clear, do not understand how institutions are supposed to work, how Congress works, what it takes to pass a bill, all this basic machinery that somewhere along the line they were never taught or were allowed to think is kind of boring, so I don't really need to know about it. And we're in an era when politics for an awful lot of people is just soapbox yelling, frankly, and not about process and procedure. And indeed, most of what really matters in politics is procedure. It may not be as sexy as a lot of other stuff, but it's really what makes the country go. And it requires a lot of investment educationally.
My question is about the potential of the promise of a more real or full democracy. So it seems that when we talk about democracy, we're really talking about representative democracy, and that sometimes is a bit of a collapsed distinction. And we're seeing things like the rise of deliberative democracy, citizens' assembly, structures that put real power in ordinary people's hands. So I'm curious what you think about these new forms of democracy. And I'm also curious if you would ever think it would be worth us having a new constitutional moment with a different set of predicates and presuppositions than the founders could have had 300 years ago, when, for instance, it was only men, propertied men. And I think most of us want a democracy that is for everyone. And so maybe it needs to be built slightly differently from the word go. What do you think?
I might just at a 3-day convening on democratic innovation, where a lot of people talked about things like citizens' assemblies, which for those that are not familiar with this, something that happens in Ireland, in Germany, and many other countries now, where a group of randomly selected citizens come together to deliberate about a important pressing policy topic. In Ireland, they had one actually about abortion recently, and make recommendations at the end of that deliberative process. It's a form of direct democracy where citizens are more directly involved. I like to think of direct democracy and representative democracy actually as not mutually exclusive. They can strengthen each other. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do with our current Congress and our current institutions to be making our democracy more directly responsive to citizens. And simple things. For example, I mentioned the Agriculture Committee listening tour, right? Why can't more committees be going around the country listening to local voices, folks that don't have lobbyists paying for them to fly to DC to testify? We can do that. That's an easy fix. And people do that around the world. Legislatures are doing that right now. It doesn't have to be so fancy. It can be something like just going and listening and having an open mic session with a local farming community. In Brazil, they even have a way where people can send in sign language videos with their thoughts on proposed legislation. There's a lot of ways that we can be doing that without creating a whole new citizens' assembly. Even recently in the United States Congress, the Environmental Justice for All Act, they tried something different where they had an online system where organizations could comment on the draft legislation. And you had several hundred environmental justice organizations and stakeholders comment on that piece of legislation because they were able to do so online. Normally, in a process like that, it's pretty insular. You have a handful of witnesses, you have a handful of lobbyists, you have a handful of people who are involved. And that's a simple fix. They use an online platform, more people could comment. You go to people's local communities and hear more people. There's a lot of more simple things that we can be doing, but I also think it is important to be having conversations like the ones that I've just been having this week about things like citizens' assemblies and deliberative democracy and all of these different ways of experimenting with democracy. I just think it's more accessible even than that.
Okay, I'm a skeptic on this subject. Okay, far be it for me to suggest that anything should limit citizens' ability to communicate their concerns and views, or that they should not be getting together to discuss what's important to them. Of course, it's manifestly good to apple pie. But I've witnessed in a number of places, different contexts. I won't go into details. Popular commissions, committees of different types attempt to function that way, and generally, I found them to be pretty disappointing. Most people don't like to participate. There are types of people in whatever society and at any level who tend to gravitate towards power positions, and it's more easy than one might imagine in an ideal world for special interests of one kind or another. They may be your special interests, not just big money special interests, to take advantage of assemblies that often are more passive than you would like. Okay? Constitutional convention, that's everybody. It's not just you and your friends, or me and my friends. Okay? It's not just the people who agree with us about the reforms that we would love to have. Now, I could talk for an hour about what I think should be done with the government. On the other hand, a lot of people whom I absolutely do not agree with would have equal input and maybe more. And I think that is a can of worms. And it is not inherently, dare I say, a progressive idea. It's aspirationally progressive or forward-looking, but the reality of crafting such a convention, we need to think very, very seriously. As I said, I'm a skeptic. I don't fundamentally disagree with some of the ideas, but they also make me nervous and doubtful.
Yeah, and I might just say that, I mean, your important point, I think, underscores how important it is that if we do any of this, if we do any of the citizen assemblies, any of the democratic innovations, that it be accessible and representative, and that we be aware of some of the structural barriers that certain people face to engaging, whether that be caregiving, whether that be geographic distance, ability, all the different things that might be limiting. So if you can't be doing any of these things in a vacuum, you have to be doing it with an awareness to actually making sure you're getting a representative voice of citizens there.
This conversation is just prompting me to highlight how important it is to take the time to get to know who your candidates are for really hyper local offices. And so oftentimes we think about democracy and elections up here, but sometimes what matters the most is who's running your kid's school district, and who's running your local community college district, and who's running your water district. And I think taking the time, I voted in California for a while, and I would gather friends every election, and we'd take the ballot and we'd sit with each other and go through every single person. And when there's 5 candidates and there's 5 of us there, each of us would take a candidate, we'd do some research, and we'd come back with our thoughts and we'd share our thoughts. And that was a really fun way to sort of ensure and keep each other accountable to our very local districts, because those are the folks that sometimes have the most impact on your day-to-day life.
May I say, if you've never seen a California ballot, it's heroic. They're the longest ballots on earth. They go for page after page.
But at least they get sent right to our house.
You're talking about an investment of days.
Yeah. But that's the point, it's like, make it fun, right? So, like you were talking about getting engaged, like that makes it fun, at least for me.
It's like, I am still registered to vote in California despite living in other places for the past decade. I also refuse to give up my California driver's license. But I lived in Chicago for a while, and there's this voter handbook called Girl, I Guess, to capture people's apathy around voting locally as well as statewide. And I think that, just thinking about coming together in a very informal way with your friends it would make it fun. Any more questions? Do we have any questions online from Zoom viewers?
So I'll be very brief. Isn't the reason why we don't try to have another constitutional convention? We remember what happened the last time that happened about the Articles of Confederation and everything. We just blew up the whole thing, and that's why nobody wants to do it.
Was that a question?
Yes, why? That's the reason why we don't do it.
Well,
What was the question?
you want to rephrase the question?
The question was about why we don't have another constitutional, convention
Because of what happened.
because of what happened at the first one.
Well, okay, I think the first one was pretty good. I think they did a hell of a good job, given the realities of politics at the time. It included some very flawed and, with hindsight, terribly distressing, disheartening elements, which is to say, yeah, it grafted tolerance of slavery into the system. It built it and gave extra representation for representatives from slave states. Enslaved people were counted for representation, but they couldn't vote, right? Okay, which was a travesty. Had that terrible compromise, it is terrible compromise not been made, there would have been no country. It was the only deal that was possible. And if you, as a thought experiment, you could imagine that constitutional convention failing. Okay, and then we would have had a fragmented North America. And I personally don't think that would have been better. I think finally we fought a war, including my own ancestors, to end slavery. It took 100 years, almost 100 years for that to occur. And a second constitutional convention, as I said in in answer to an earlier question, is anybody's game. It wouldn't just be made up of people who want the kinds of reforms that I personally would like to see. It would be made of, also include people who might want to see a more authoritarian structure for the United States. Fill in the blanks. Anything is possible.
Is there time for one more question or one more? I think I saw a hand in the middle. Or if not, I would like to thank my panelists. Like your questions, picking up on some of the things that have been said repeatedly, but what's one thing that we can do online and one thing we could do in person to essentially move the needle forward, respond to some of the themes that we've explored and discussed tonight?
So, I mean, I talked about sharing the awareness building video that we have on political violence, but actually it's really important. Kathleen was talking about all the misinformation that is out there about elections, but we can be amplifying accurate information about elections. Your local election official and election administrator, their Twitter account, their social media account, it's pretty easy to just reshare that post and be amplifying known sources of accurate information about the election so that others have that information as well. And to be a part of the important, I think very, very important, momentous time that we're in now to really be making sure that we have a safe and secure election this fall. And something that you can do in person. I mean, we talked about a lot of different things from being a poll worker to attending your local town hall with your local congressperson. And I think just the most important thing that you can do is do any one of these things. Take a moment. You're in DC. I keep saying go to a congressional hearing, go to a local town hall, do something. There's so many different things that you can do. And of course, go vote, or better yet, be a poll worker in the election. Definitely.
Go to debate, listen to candidates.
My in-person recommendation would be to vote. And then online is find your Secretary of State's office. Go online and see what they have to say.
I can't really add to what my colleagues have said. The Brennan Center's resources are fabulous. And everything that you both have said is, I think really gets to the nitty gritty of it. You can also run for office, by the way. School boards, start somewhere. You know, you know, a lot of village local offices are begging for people to run, begging. Is a lot of work yet. Can it be boring sometimes? Yeah, but it's democracy in action.
Everyone, remember to fill out your evaluations and return them, and then we will introduce the playwright, Jamie Stiehm, and give her a round of applause.
It's terrific conversation, very provocative, very common sense too. So we're grateful to have you comment on the play and shed more light on it. NYU in DC is a wonderful host. Thank you for having us here. Thanks. I was saying what a stimulating discussion this was, and you added a lot of light to the play for me. You gave me some ideas to work on. NYU in DC is a terrific venue, terrific host. Maybe we'll come up to New York. We also, the cast and crew, the cast is gone, but they were terrific. They brought those parts to life. Aaron Burr is an intriguing character, and I think the actor did him justice tonight. The DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities sponsored this evening for us. And it's a wonderful crossroads of students and DC residents and New Yorkers. So thank you for everybody coming together. Is there anything else, Michael? Okay.
Round of applause.